Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday edition of the Daily Objective. I am Mark Pellegrino, and my co-host James Valliant, who I am totally excited to see. It's been months since I last saw you. You're looking fine, you dapper young man, you. We're going to discuss a couple of things today, and there's going to be a bit of controversy between the two of us, from what I understand in the pre-show meeting. But one of the topics is a man from Gaza was interviewed by Fox News, and he put the blame for the oppression of the Gazans squarely in the lap of Hamas. Now, this is something that you do not hear at all in the popular narrative on social media. You certainly don't hear it on the establishment news networks, with the exception of Fox now, and maybe an op-ed I think this person might have thrown out there as well. But it's certainly not the narrative that we're ingesting here in the States. So we're going to unpack that, and also we're going to do a little Mahmoud Khalil discussion, because of course there's been some issues with respect to his deportation, and a judge ruling on the fact, ruling in the administration's in their favor, and two objectivists, go figure, who potentially disagree on this issue. But I have a sense that the prosecutor might whoop me on the mat. But we're gonna see. Let's deal with the first issue, James. A Gazan using his full name and to describe the truth that Hamas is the true oppressors of the Palestinian people. Now, this is a dead man walking to me. What do you say to this?
Yeah, what courage. What tremendous courage this takes. But if I were trapped in Gaza right now, and seeing the facts for myself, um, uh, you know, uh, in the name of protecting my family, I might myself, that would be my own psychological predilection, I think, is to be suicidal like that. But one could compare it to an act of suicide almost. But what a brave act of suicide, in the sense that it will bring attention as nothing has to the real sources here. The axiom going into this is that the Palestinians in Gaza are different than Hamas. And we've spent a good deal of our effort over the last year and a half showing that no, there's really not much daylight between the Palestinian population, certainly not the dominant culture, and Hamas. Hamas, after all, did win an election, 18 years ago. And it's true it was a plurality, but the other groups that were high up in terms of getting votes were either worse or only slightly better, and they're all different flavors of jihadist madness. But what courage. He has said that it was Hamas who started it and brought all the suffering in Gaza onto the Palestinians in Gaza. He said that. He said
Wow.
they were the cause of this. He said they are the oppressors. And he's done a Fox News interview where his face is there, and he actually was saying out loud, "I know I'm taking a huge risk, but if life is your standard of value, if you want something more than slavery, if you want something more than the constant fear of dying, if you want something more than the constant fear of your own children dying, then that's the kind of courage this extreme context requires." I understand he's written it out in an op-ed for the Washington Post as well. What tremendous courage. We have seen some protests. I'm not sure what the meaning of those protests are. I don't know how widespread this opinion is getting. It certainly doesn't challenge the fundamentals behind the jihadist philosophy. On the other hand, it squarely puts the blame on Hamas. It squarely calls Hamas the oppressors. And that is a huge step.
That is a huge step. Now, the question is, I mean, even though Fox is probably the most popular cable network news affiliate that there is in the country, how many people are actually going to see this, and how many people is this message going to resonate with? Because it seems at the moment that the Palestinian PR machine works overtime on social media, and more and more people are getting their news not from the establishment, not even Fox, which is now the establishment, but from Twitter, from X, from Facebook, from Apple News, or wherever. Their sources simply are not the establishment news, and this is not big on their agenda on the social media network area. So you think this will have get some play in the general population?
No, there are intellectual forces out there who would not want to give it play. On the other hand, if they were smart, they would give it play. See, the Palestinians aren't this giant monolith that supports Hamas. There is a distinction. There are, quote, innocent Palestinians out there, however few in number. But the force, the threat that this guy's under that we're talking about kind of makes it all the more remarkable and makes you think that maybe it is more widespread. Now, on the other hand, as we pointed out many times on this channel, it's the Palestinian population that has been hiding the hostages, that has been
Yeah.
supporting all of this. One little heads up from an ordinary Palestinian might do all kinds of help for Israel, and you don't see it. And we've complained how there isn't an anti-Hamas, anti-jihadist movement among the Palestinians. This shows that while it may be a minority, a brave, brave minority, but there is a minority view out there among Palestinians. Alas, they are the minority view. Now, the media, you're absolutely right. People are getting their information from Joe Rogan. Young people certainly are more getting their information from Joe Rogan than from the New York Times or the television media. Um, and to answer your question, I just don't see how much play this is going to get because people like Joe Rogan and Dave Smith or whoever bring their own agenda to the table. But if, as I say, if they were smart, even the defenders of the Palestinians and the haters, those who hate on Israel, I would think would seize upon this. See, look, see, you've got a whole bunch of innocent Palestinians who are being, in effect, held hostage themselves. It's not just the Israelis they took hostage back on October 7th. There's at least a class of Palestinians in Gaza who are themselves regard themselves as being held hostage, having their tongues ripped out, being suppressed. Yeah, this guy may well be a dead man walking. That's the problem.
Let me just play devil's advocate here for a second because it's the types like Dave Smith and Joe Rogan who I think just sort of follows what Dave is thinking. I don't think he's particularly well versed in this region's politics. It's Dave Smith's of the world that said we need to show nuance, right? And that understanding that the Palestinian people aren't the monolith that we claim they are, might feed into the narrative that this nuance now means that we have to do the ceasefire. I mean, there's no other alternative but to stop the war. Look, we have this alternative perspective here, and he probably represents a percentage of people there who are being killed by the IDF. Now, what say you to that?
Well, I think we have to get the causal relationship correct here. Where was this guy's voice a year ago? Where were we're finally beginning to see some demonstrations against Hamas in Gaza. Where were they a year ago? Where were they 10 years ago? Where were they 17 years ago? Now, I understand the same social and political pressures were there, but it is the situation, let me suggest, in Gaza that has gotten this guy to speak up. Had it not been for to the extent as Israel has been fighting and making life miserable for the Palestinians, what we need is more Palestinian misery. What we need is more Israeli military action. It is that and that alone which has caused this guy to get to such an extreme position where he says, "Look, we're dying here. We're having things are miserable here." And so apparently, it's the direct relationship between the misery that Israel has brought down upon Gaza that have liberated this guy's voice. Because look at the value thing. He's, well, I got Hamas over here, but then again, I've got the Israeli attack, self-defensive attack over here. And so what we need is to oomph. Israel needs to get way more active and punishing of the Palestinians for us to have more voices like this. If we cut off aid, for example, the whole idea of providing aid, which America's primary interest has been to get aid to the innocent Palestinians, that is counterproductive to this happening at all. If it weren't for the fact that this guy's now beginning to wonder where, for the safety of his children, where his next meal is going to come from, maybe an Israeli bomb is going to come take him out. If he didn't have those kind of concerns, he wouldn't be brave enough to be speaking out against Hamas. So there's a direct causal relationship in my mind between the amount of misery that Israel puts on Gaza and the liberation of this guy's tongue, if you will. So we only see that because of Israeli action. And as the Israeli action has stepped up a notch, at least, now this guy's coming forth. So I'd ask, where was this guy a year ago? Where were people like him 10 years ago? It's in the absence of moral clarity. And I think this is really what I mean, it's more than just the attacks, counterattacks, self-defensive attacks. I would urge always qualify it with. But if it weren't for Israeli action in Gaza, you wouldn't be seeing that. That's true. But more than that, it is a moral condition. In other words, America as well is saying, go for it. And when you got the friend of Israel not pulling their punches verbally, saying, go for it, Israel, we think you're morally on the right side. Yep, there's hell to pay. So let's give Trump even some credit. And I'm loath to do that in many contexts. But let's give at least Trump some comparative credit. It's better than Biden, who's hamstringing Israel everywhere, every chance. You got no bunker buster bombs, don't attack Hezbollah in the north, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want escalation. And to have a president that is at least even just slightly more morally consistent on this is another significant factor. So I'd say Israeli action in Gaza plus they're being liberated from the constraints that their ally America was putting on them. The moral sanction there have combined to liberate tongues like that. So guess what we need, folks? We need more of hell's Trump to pay. And the more hell that there is to suffer, we need more Palestinian suffering, as Razi likes to point out many times. I agree with him. The Palestinians need to suffer. Until and unless a population feels that suffering, will they go out and hang their Mussolini by piano string, if you get the analogy.
Indeed, I couldn't agree with you more, you war hawk. You, yes, we get accused as objectivists of being war hawks when no, actually, we're the benevolent ones. We want the war to end quickly with as few casualties as possible, and you do that by winning, and winning means overwhelming force and overwhelming the enemy, so that they understand in no uncertain terms that their premises are in error and will lead to death and destruction. We did it with the Japanese. We did it with the Germans. We failed to do it with the communists, which is why I think communism metastasizes all over the world and people still think it's an ideal to be pursued, because we never defeated it the way it should have been defeated. You can only defeat systems of force through force, unfortunately. They abandon civility, they abandon rights by their very nature. And let's not forget, war is the absence of civilization, and people keep trying to make war civil. It's not. Sorry. You've abandoned rights. You've abandoned persuasion. You've abandoned the democratic process when you decide to invade someone's country and murder their people. You need to be stopped. That's it. That's it. That's the only moral goal of the IDF. It's not placing the Palestinian people on the same footing as the Israeli people morally. It's not trying to, there are people who say they should avoid civilian casualties. Okay. I mean, that's what they're trying to do, but they're also doing it at the expense of Israeli soldiers, Israeli men and women whose lives are being lost unnecessarily, and at the expense of their economy. They're expending, all of their productive forces in the attempt to not only save themselves, but the Palestinian people from themselves. And that's too big a moral order for them to take. They need to just end the war, and you do it by defeating it. There's just no pretty way of doing it, James. People want to have their cakes and eat it too. They want to pretend there's a victory without getting a victory, and that's the scary thing, is that people want to have their cake and eat it too, right?
Boy, that is
Um,
so.
we
I
have
mean,
we have a couple. Go
oh
ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, if Pearl Harbor was enough to set off a chain reaction that would end in nuclear bombs at Japan, think of October 7th. If systematic rape, if the intentional murder of children, the mutilation of bodies, doesn't get through your head that these guys are not, you can't negotiate with them. they're in no condition to even be discussing anything with us until they get completely hammered and completely disheartened. You have to psychologically crush them. I mean, think of it, then use it, circling back to the Japan example. Even after the Battle of Okinawa, a bloody, horrific mess, not just for the Americans, but for the Japanese. If that wasn't enough to get them to surrender, then you realize, whoa, these people as a population are willing to take out bamboo sticks and fight off the Allied invaders. And if the bombing of Tokyo, the conventional bombing of Tokyo, didn't get it through, then obviously, this is going to sound very paradoxical. The best thing to happen to Japan in the long run were those nuclear bombs that got them to fully, completely surrender, psychologically say, no, we're wrong, we surrender. You guys take over for a while. We will learn from you guys. We screwed up. Until you get to that psychological state, you really don't have hope, long-term hope for peace. And so it's cruel to say, but perhaps, but it's unfortunate because the cruelty came from the aggressors, from the savages. And we have to recognize that. For a quick termination of war, you need a termination of the ideology that made it possible, the support for that ideology that made it possible.
Right. There are those who think that's not possible, but we know by historical precedent that it is. And let's not forget that these are the savages that strangled the Beavis babies. They strangled them to death. That means their killer had to look those children in the eye and kill
How
them
can
up
you do
close
so?
and personal. Now,
How can you
what
do
kind of
so?
animal does that?
I know.
Okay. Yeah, an animal
We in
that
the
doesn't
West can't
deserve
even
mercy.
we can't even in the West, we can't even get our minds around that. How could you, with your own hands, kill a child, a baby? Well, guess what? They did it. There
They
are
did it.
people in this world that different from you, that they're able to kill babies with their own bare hands. That is something, good people have a hard time. And that's the thing. We project sort of our benevolence on them. And that is a mistake, ladies and gentlemen. What Mark says is correct. To initiate a war like this makes it quite plain that you are outside the bounds of civilization. We're way past the point of discussion, negotiation, bargaining. We're at the point where they need to be punished so severely, they need to realize, in fact, the error of violence.
Yeah, it's difficult for soy boys like Dave Smith to understand that. Super chat. It's difficult for anybody in the West, I think, to understand it. So I shouldn't just knock Dave and his girly hands, but it's hard for somebody who is grown up in a civilized world to even understand that that kind of brutality exists and that mindset exists, and that the only way to deal with it is through very distasteful violence. No civilized human being enjoys violence, but sometimes creepy psychopaths put you in the position of having to defend your life by doing ugly things and things that you wouldn't ordinarily do, unfortunately. And we just have to wrap our minds around that reality, be content with that reality, and get the job done. Super chat from Gail Parker, five. I think that's dollars. Thank you, Gail. PC with four. It looks like pounds. My glasses are 4.99 pounds. I think PC says James. James, this is for you. There are very few who do not support the October 7th in Gaza. It's evident from the fact that nobody has tried to rise up. What do you say about that?
I agree. I can
Yep.
only agree. If a significant portion of the population felt otherwise, we would have seen some action. We would have seen protests. We would have seen a resistance movement. There is no significant resistance movement. This guy is an outlier. This guy is definitely on the edge of things. He's a case at the margin. He's not the norm. But look at what's happening. His tongue is finally liberated. As courageous as it is for him to say what he's saying, he may be a dead man walking because, most of his neighbors, 90+% of his neighbors strongly disagree with him and support October 7th. Unfortunately, I agree. Most Palestinians do agree with October 7th. You ask them on the West Bank, they're apparently even in more support of October 7th than the Gazans are. So, but the point is, though, that this guy He may be an outlier, he may be a dinky minority, but we need to, foster that. We need to encourage that. The only way to encourage that is to continue, as Mark points out, it is the attacker who has set the terms on which we have to deal with them. Ruthless force, ruthless force,
And
and
the attacker does not get to set the terms on how things end. They do not
that
get
is
to
the
set the
key.
terms.
Exactly. And so, what we need, let me suggest, PC, is more Israeli action, more Palestinian suffering. We need to, now that by itself, that won't give them the positive philosophy, but until and unless Israel can come in with an occupation that starts imposing, if you will, a different educational and governmental system, they won't learn the better alternative. That what they need to know right now is that Hamas kills them. Hamas doesn't work. If you want your kids to survive, get rid of Hamas. And you have to take risks to do that. Unfortunately, it's October 7th that compels him to be in a position. And that's what's so important about the language he uses. Hamas is our oppressor. Hamas and October 7th is to blame for my suffering right now and the danger I'm in. We need to make that really crystal clear to the entire Palestinian population, or there's no long-term hope here.
So we're on your side, PC. We all agree that it's a small minority, but it could be the minority that turns the tide for the Gazan people.
Take
If
those two sticks and
and
rub them together real hard to get more of
you
more
get
of this
you
stuff to
yes,
set this into a fire. But I grant
it,
you, it's not a brush fire yet. But we should be
indeed.
blowing on that fire really aggressively.
We should, and we should be hyping this news as much as possible on social media, because it has to counter a lot of disinformation, misinformation out there, because this is a war that's fought on multiple fronts, and it's being fought in the social media front as well. It's there. The Palestinian support movement is attempting to demoralize the Israeli people, morally shame them in the eyes of the world, and hope that that shame and demoralization makes them lose the will to fight. Well, Israel's been in this position before. Everything that people are saying now is they've been saying for decades upon decades upon decades. And Israel's faced an enemy and multiple enemies all alone, betrayed by their allies, and they're going to do it again. So the sooner, folks, if anybody in Gaza is hearing this, you wrap your minds around the existence, the permanent existence of Israel, and come to terms with it, the sooner you get this war over with. Bonnie, 99 cents, thank you very much for your contribution. Now let's move on, because we don't have that much time left, and I wanted to talk about, this was supposed to be this was not the primary topic, but we spent a great deal of time on it. It appears that the Trump administration has found some obscure law that enables the Secretary of State to deport non-citizens who are are acting against the interests of American foreign policy. Now, they've taken away the student visas of many folks across the United States at this point, but one character has grabbed the headlines, and you'd know Mahmoud Khalil. You'd know that name by now, unless you've been sitting under a rock somewhere. Especially on social media, because there's a lot of pro Mahmoud folks out there who are trying to fight what they think is a civil rights battle out there. Now, he's been detained, whisked off to Louisiana, and held in bondage for his role as the mastermind and leader of many of the protests over at Columbia University, which is the maw, the belly of the fucking beast, if you don't mind my saying. I think it's the source of all of our philosophical and moral woes, and he's just the latest shining example of that. But he apparently led many of these protests, and I know he served as a negotiator between the Columbia between the administration of Columbia and the student protesters. All of this I find hilarious. And the wail and cry went up amongst some of us, maybe me as well, that, as much as I detest this human being and would pee in his mouth if given the opportunity, sorry for that, I just had to say it, maybe even worse. I chafe at the lack of due process in this, at least to my layman's eyes. Now, I have a feeling now, right now, James and I are setting the bell, beep, beep, beep. We've got 6 minutes going on, and here comes the roll. Now, let's see if James can jujitsu me on the mat. All right, go,
Well,
James.
the
It's your
first thing
turn.
you said was that this is a kind of obscure law. It's really not. It's been standard black letter federal law. We can criticize the way the American government does this, but there's really two distinct questions here. Should this morally happen? So there's the moral question of, is this guy deportable under a proper system of law? And you kind of began to answer the question with the facts there on this. Yeah, this guy, in my view, should be deportable because he did much more than say stuff. He actually was the negotiator for extortion. A criminal activity happened at Columbia. Real criminal activity, criminal trespass, vandalism, threats,
True.
blocking students, taking over the thing. And the deportation, since law enforcement is mostly a state and local matter, the deportation of this guy shouldn't depend upon the mercy of Columbia University or the mercy of the New York Police Department and the Manhattan DA. No, the federal government should be free of those uh, derelictions in government responsibility in protecting rights and be able to deport this criminal. He is a violent criminal, and in my view, and supports violence and has been, like I say, the negotiator. You mean the extortion artist when it comes to this. And so this extortion artist deserves deportation. Now, the question is, now we can talk about what the law should be, but the existing law is relatively straightforward on this. The law that he's being deported under is a 1952 law that comes from, and again, this may be controversial to people, the era of the Second Great Red Scare and communism, where people, of course, were deportable because they were supporters of communism. Now, the American Communist Party was on the take from Moscow, and that was enough in the minds of many people to say, no, we need to be able, the Secretary of State needs to be able to deport people who are inconsistent with whose mere presence here, mind you, is inconsistent with American foreign policy aims. I think that law is too broad. But under
But wait a
existing
minute. Can I
law,
can I can I interrupt because you have me inside control right now? So I have to see if I can buck my way out of this and get and reform my guard or sweep
yes.
you. Let's see. So but the Communist Party USA, we knew was interacting and taking their orders, marching orders from the Kremlin. They were also committing actual criminal acts. Now I don't know if now you say this guy was you frame his negotiation process as extortion. Um, very well, I guess that could be. But can they directly link him to the vandalism and to the violence and to
Oh
the
yeah,
occupations of buildings?
oh yeah, yeah. They're using violence to make demands.
I know
He
they
is
are, but
negotiating. They're
oh, so
using criminal means to make their demands. Now, these criminals who are doing that, he's going to be the negotiator, the go-between, to get Colombia to disinvest, to de-invest and de-link with Israel. That's an extortion artist. The negotiations themselves are, in my mind, morally and should be legally corrupt. You don't start keep breaking hey, it's a nice living room you got there, Mark. Let me start knocking things over. And if someone says, well, if you want me to stop knocking things over, you better give me something. Well, I call that extortion, you see. And he is a criminal just as the negotiator for these other criminals, he is a criminal worthy of deportation. My belief in a liberal open border is such that I oppose the visa system. So I do believe, and here we may have agreement. We
hmm
need a complete reform of our immigration laws. It
yeah.
shouldn't be a question of visas being, and there should be some due process in the sense that the federal government should at least provide sufficient evidence that this guy is actively promoting, encouraging, co-conspirator with, extorting, all the things that come with
Before they take him from New York all the way down to Louisiana, don't you think? I mean, why did they take him down to Louisiana and not leave him in New
well, the
York and
Constitution
incarcerate him
does
there?
require that the criminal process happen in the place where it happened, but it also
Yes.
allows for a change of venue. Now, under current immigration law, the federal
If
government
but if
can,
a change of venue, if the accused cannot get a fair trial over there, right?
right?
So, but
Right.
so all this, as much as I sympathize with your position, and as much as I hate this dude, there's a part of me that, and I know Razi's going to hate me for this too, but I still have to keep banging my point home. I mean, due process is a principle, a principle of individual rights. It's the way we preserve individual rights. And if they could start violating those with the unpopular, the horrible people in our culture that we despise, everything they stand for and everything that they say and do, then they can start doing it to you. It's just a matter
Well,
of
let's not
time
Trump
before that
invent.
happens. Look, if they change his venue, if
But Trump
they
didn't invent this. Trump is operating within long existing. That's why I pointed out that the law dates from 1952 that they're invoking here. Let me give you an example you might appreciate. Charlie Chaplin goes over, he spent years making movies in Hollywood. He's native of Great Britain. He spends years making movies in Hollywood. He leaves the country to make another movie. And before he comes back in, it's well known that his friends and associates were communists. And so the State Department says, well, maybe we should reconsider allowing him back in. And Charlie Chaplin refused to fight it. Now, that's a very notorious and famous case of Charlie Chaplin saying, well, I'm not going back to the United States if they're going to question my right to come back in. And here's a guy not like Khalil. He was a beloved actor the world over, and he's saying, I'm not coming back in. Now, that seems to me a greater injustice than doing it to Khalil. If there has ever been if a case can be made for, a sympathetic person, let me suggest Charlie Chaplin is much better than Khalil. Trump did not invent this. And although this is not under the Alien Acts of 1898, let me remind you of the Alien.
1790, yeah.
Thank you. 1798. In 1798, there were two acts passed: the Alien Enemies Act and the Alien Friends Act. And
Mm.
under the Alien Friends Act did not survive but a couple of years. But think about it. The Alien Friends Act that said that the president could deport someone from an allied country that we had no hostilities with. It's the Alien Enemies Act
Oh,
that.
Adams. Oh,
Okay, so
he
but the
was off
point
his
is that
nut.
Trump did not invent our rotten immigration laws. Trump seems to me, in the Khalil case at least, is operating well within the parameters of well-established U.S. law. Now, you and I might criticize that law. I would. I would say that there needs to be a different kind of due process. The 14th Amendment is very clear that persons, not citizens, are owed due process, and they don't distinguish between the due process owed citizens and non-citizens. It is assumed that there is some level of difference. I'm not sure I accept
I
that there's
don't
any
accept that.
level of difference. Uh,
I don't accept that. I
well,
know
then,
I
sure,
read in
we
Douglas
agree.
I read in Douglas an op-ed by Douglas Murray in the New York Post, of all places, that he said he just sort of said it off the cuff. Citizens and non-citizens don't have the same rights. I'm sorry, if you're in the United States, you're under the umbrella of the protection of individual rights. The Constitution does embrace you. That's a free rider benefit of being in this country, because we believe that individual rights extend to all people, and you're not different because you're a non-citizen.
And in the Gitmo
Even
case, from 20 years ago, the Supreme Court made that quite clear too. Just because
yeah,
you send them outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, to Guantanamo Bay and Cuba, which is not U.S. territory, it's leased from Cuba. The Supreme Court said, you don't get to skip due process just because you've sent them out of the country. That might relate to this guy who was wrongfully sent to the El Salvadoran prison, for
yes,
example. That
yes,
directly relates. But let's even back up further. It seems to me the only real difference between a citizen and any other person that should be recognized under law or something like voting rights. But apart
yes,
from the privilege to vote, and that's why they would distinguish the terms right to vote versus privilege to vote, because
yes,
voting is kind of a privilege. Don't Many states don't allow felons to vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are conditions to voting which are over and above just being legally
what,
here in the United States. And citizenship, it would seem to me, is one of those basics. But
yes.
there are some differences. I would not let just any old person vote. I don't believe in a huge, broad electorate
As
franchise.
As we are on this page, and this is a conversation for another time that we should have somewhere else, but I'm definitely all for full naturalization. And I don't think that birthright citizenship should be a thing. You have to choose to accept the values of this country and then affect the political process.
I'm kind
You
of in
come,
favor of birthright citizenship. I think
yeah,
that one of the big problems of Dred Scott was that blacks were, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court says that blacks are really never citizens, based on the historical error that there were
but
never free
we
black
got
citizens.
past that. We got past the Civil
We
War, and
did because of the
we had to
14th
incorporate.
Amendment's all
Yes,
persons born and
but we
naturalized.
had to do that. We had to do that because there were a couple of million folks who were at that point who were brought into this country against their will, and they needed to be integrated into the population. And that was a very expedient thing to do at the time.
Should
But
citizenship, though, be the sole
I,
condition for voting?
I still think the
A
citizen.
necessary condition, but
I still think
should citizenship be alone the condition for voting? You see, even then they didn't say that. Could you have property requirements, income requirements? Should women be householders? Before the 1920s and the 19th Amendment was passed, people were saying, well, certain states could allow women to vote under certain circumstances. And in Great Britain, householder women could vote even
sure.
before.
And
Uh,
in the territories, there were a couple of
So
territories
I
where women
wouldn't
could vote. New
equate
Jersey, women could
citizenship
vote.
with the privilege to vote. On the other hand, I can understand it being a precondition of the ability to vote. And when you say birthright citizenship, obviously it doesn't include tourists and diplomats and their children. That was already understood by the framers of the 14th Amendment. Um,
Can I just say that even if you're born here, but if you hold values that are antithetical to Americanism, let's say the communists, there's a group of communists now that want to claim that they're American patriots, and I'd say it's impossible. Communism is antithetical to Americanism. These people can vote. They're natural citizens here. They have the power to influence the political process, and I think that's disastrous and scary. I still hate Mahmoud Khalil. And you're sort of turning me in your favor here. PC says for another 4.99 pounds. Thank you, PC. Only citizens have the right to be in country. Non-citizens can be removed. That's law.
well, I would say that if a citizen commits a crime, they are not subject to deportation. If a person who is not a citizen and has been here, and I would make it fact dependent, I would say that the law of deporting even criminal aliens should be fact dependent. Have they been here for 20 years and not committed crimes until just now? Or is it like Khalil? He'd only been here for 2 years on a student visa, and he only got his green card, what, but in November, last November.
Mm.
So he's in my view, there should be no question about his ability to be deported, given the fact that he was a criminal ringleader in my mind.
Well, you
And
put that in a very interesting context, which I wasn't thinking about, which is I simply, you read that he's the negotiator between these two sides, and I don't think about the full context when I read that sentence. The full context is violent students harassing Jewish students, breaking things,
making
and
demands,
making demands under the threat of more violence. So you're right. And occupying whole buildings. I mean, look, I don't think universities are places where these protests should take place. They're places of learning. If you want to protest, go on the Mall of Washington or to the state capitol and protest there, or rent a park or an arena and carry on your protest. Leave other people alone, man. The right to protest doesn't mean you can clog up the streets or prevent other people from learning. That's not what the First Amendment protects. It doesn't protect your violence, your incendiary behavior, your threats, none of that. You should go to jail. You should serve time. You should be kicked out of Columbia University hard on your ass. And remember that what that one billionaire guy did to the Stanford law students that protested. Didn't he like publish all their names and then make
right?
them?
I'll
He
never
made them
hire them, and you ought not to hire them, my friends.
yes, and that guy had
Yeah,
a lot of weight, and those people are fucked, and they should be fucked.
they ought to
So
be. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely correct. Free speech does not even, people, how many, over the last 40 years, how many lectures at universities have I been to where the speaker was completely drowned out by yelling? That
yeah.
yelling, they would say, is my free speech. No, it isn't. It is not free speech. Your protest Right, protest is not the same as free speech if it involves violating someone else's rights, and you're violating the rights of all the people in there, the speaker, those who wanted to hear him, the property rights of the university. Now, the fact that the universities themselves are the sources of all this corruption, they don't understand what free speech is, and so they
Right.
equate free speech with the ability to set fire to things. So if that's your view of free speech, they can block bridges, they can set fire, they can break windows, they can block Jewish students, threaten, people from going to a Zionist, pro-Zionist rally, etc. That's not free speech, ladies and gentlemen. That's the behavior of thugs. That's the violation of rights. In fact, that's the opposite of free speech. And in the case of those lectures that were always interrupted that I went to, it shows you it's the opposite of free speech. It's
Yes.
meant to rip out tongues and shut down debate, not increase debate.
Agreed. Now, um, so even though I have issues with some of the shadiness of moving the venue and moving him to another state, all of that just smacks of shady behavior on the part of the government, and I don't want to give the government any room to do shady behavior at
I
all,
agree, but
because they
in this
take that
case,
shady behavior and it then becomes the new norm,
I
right?
agree, but it's not as though Trump invented this law or wrote this law. It
True, but
is
he is
a
exploiting.
70
It's
a
true, but
70-year-old law.
he is exploiting laws right now to hammer on immigrants, one of whom we now know is probably an innocent person who's in a very dangerous prison system right now, and that's scary.
That is
That's just,
scary. That
all
is
of these
scary.
deportations are have me a little bit freaked out.
Well, that's
Uh,
why we need greater due process for in immigration. Immigrants aren't accorded rights properly in my country. Whatever the 14th Amendment says about persons getting the right to due process, equal protection, persons even get this, persons even get a much broader set of rights when you consider the 14th Amendment in light of the rest of the Constitution.
mm,
And so, in my view, we don't even understand our own Constitution. If the plain meaning of the words of our Constitution are not being properly enacted, and the Supreme Court has spent, what, 150 years ignoring the plain meaning of the words of our Constitution to
mhm.
reshape it along policy lines, then we're in deep trouble. But I have to say that under the facts of the case of Khalil, he is morally, even under a moral legal system, deportable in my mind because he's a criminal. So if you're asking what the law should be, under even my objectivist my at least my understanding of what an objectivist utopia would be, he would be deportable even if with greater due process. If you're asking what the existing law is, well, he's easily deportable and on a much lower standard. And Trump did not invent the laws by which he's deporting Khalil. So
Well, I certainly wish the Trump administration, Kash Patel, and the FBI would get on the American Communist Party, because there's a guy on there named Hazal Din and Hinkle, who are virulent anti-Semites who are who spend the American Communist Party money going into Qatar and rubbing elbows with Hamas and supporting douchey psychopaths like Nasrallah. And so all of these people need to be taken care of. I'm perfectly fine with deporting guys like Hazaldin and even Hinkle, who's I think an American citizen, and
ooh,
getting
deporting
them.
citizens.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's a
why
very
not?
interesting.
He shills for China.
You'd
Our
be
number,
cool with
our
deporting citizens?
he shills for China. Hold on, there's no paradox in what I'm saying. He shills for China. He shills for Putin, and he shills for Hamas, a known enemy of not just Israel but the entire West. I mean, let's face it. Their goal is a worldwide caliphate. It's not. They don't want to stop at Israel. They want
Right.
Islamicism to be a worldwide phenomenon. And so he goes in there and actively supports these people. To me, he's supporting an active military opponent of the West. That makes him, to me, legitimately fall under this 1950s law potentially. And hey, if he dreams of a communist society and he thinks it's great in China, which he's constantly saying they're winning, why not deport him anyway?
Where
Why
do you
not?
deport a
That's
citizen?
You deport him to where he wants to go, where he says it's better.
He
That's
gets to pick.
China. He
And how
also
do
he
we
also
know they'll
posts
take him?
he also posts pictures of Kim Jong Un and says this is what a leader looks like.
Okay, send him to North Korea then. He's picked.
Yes, so that's what I'm saying. Why not? There
Send
is
him to
no
the horrible
paradox in what
slave
I'm saying.
state and have to worship the great leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I mean, despite what I'm saying about my suspicions with respect to the due process, you know this stuff better than I. So
How
I'm going
about
to
we have a
defer.
domestic crime that says when you go overseas and support our enemies, and see, America
Yes.
is never morally clear about who their enemies are. If we
Hmm.
were able to say, no, look, Iran and all of its proxies and allies there, and if you support, actively, materially support our enemies in a time of war, that is enough to get you criminally prosecuted here. And at least if we can't deport citizens, at least we can throw them in convict them, give them due
Okay.
process, a jury trial, and put
You're
them in the
ruining.
scout
You're
here.
ruining. You're ruining my fantasy. I just want to see.
Well,
I just want
as
to
a
see how
con
Hinkle does for 3 weeks in North Korea. That's all.
I know, but they don't have an Eighth Amendment over there about cruel and unusual punishment. They don't have a Fifth
No, they
Amendment,
don't. And he'll
and
discover that
so,
really quickly if he
but you
comes up on
see,
the wrong
if
side.
if I'm granting the rights in the Bill of Rights to all persons, as I think ought to be the effort here, as a constitutional theorist, I have to think that through. I would people, criminals very often, in fact, usually the violent criminals aren't punished sufficiently. So does that mean I
Agreed.
should get to go in there and send, Rocco and his buddies to go in and rough them up and give them some street justice once they're in prison? Well, that may happen in many prisons, but that's still not legally sanctioned in my mind, nor should it be. We should have objective law that defends individual rights, and that is what informs my view of the Constitution. And I've heard there's this new political party out there that actually shows signs of having a little more respect for the U.S. Constitution.
What a pivot that was. Can I just say, good job. Yes, there is one. It's legitimate. It's registered, unlike the American Communist Party. We can take donations legitimately as a political party, and we're now spreading out across the United States. It's called the American Capitalist Party, americancapitalistparty.org. Read our policies and watch Michael Leibowitz and I, who is the co-chairman of the American Capitalist Party. I am the chairman. Watch us on Capitalist Corner every morning. I don't want to. I feel like the time conflicts with you guys, so I can't in good conscience. I don't want to steal your audience because you guys are great.
Oh, but on the
Um,
other hand, I know both Rozzy and me want you to have at least a moment where you can, promote this.
I do.
Uh,
I do want to promote the Capitalist Corner, but I also want you guys because you're saying such important things about Israel and Palestinians. It needs to be said. Nobody else in the world is saying it, and it needs to be said. Hinkle is a citizen. Daniel tells me. I don't care. He likes North Korea and China and Russia better. Let
and
him
perhaps
go.
justice would be to send him to North Korea
That's what
to
I'm saying.
understand what it is to live in a slave society of misery and starvation and
And and
compelled worship of
and
their great leader. On the other hand, being a person in the United States, he has rights, and
stop
those
it.
rights cannot be overcome. His fifth, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth Amendment rights, much less his First Amendment free speech rights, cannot simply be ignored. We are more civilized. We are rights respecting. And that is what we fight for when we're fighting for America overseas and for liberal values overseas. To compromise on those would be to end the whole distinction that any good fight for America would stand for.
Somehow we've switched positions, and now you're making my argument. And anyway, um, see what hating somebody like a Hinkle anti-Semite like Hinkle can do to you. It just corrupts you. PC again with 4.99 pounds. Thank you for all this support, PC. I got to say, James, last year people took down the U.S. flag in D.C., put up the Palestinian one. It was on the news. Yeah, they did. Yeah,
And
they
that's
did. They
criminal
did. Did.
trespass and vandalism, for which
Mm-hmm.
they should have been. And the ridiculous approach of the universities is just that. They're letting people get away with crimes. People should be free to sue those universities, the students who are being interfered with, and everyone else who's being interfered with at those universities should be able to sue those universities for letting criminals get away with shit on their campus. And
Yeah.
should the local law enforcement be able to do something? Should the DC government at George Washington University or the Manhattan DEA in Columbia University, should they be cracking down and filing charges? That's the correct way to approach these criminal thugs. Now, I Donald Trump would say burning any American flag, even your own flag in the backyard, should be a crime. There is a flat violation of the First Amendment. He doesn't
Mhm.
understand what free speech really consists of. Property rights and civil rights are unity, people. They're the same thing looked at from different angles, is all. So a person should be free to burn an American flag. Let's just say that. Or put up a Palestinian flag on their own effing flagpole if they want. On the other hand, if they go to a campus and they destroy the school's statue, the school's flag, then they are committing crimes and ought to be prosecuted for it. And the cowardice of universities and the politically correct, I guess, approach of local law enforcement in so many of our big cities should not be defining what America is or ought to be doing either. These are criminals who should be prosecuted for their criminal activities.
Can
Now,
I
are
just
they
say,
despicable? Yeah. Even if you did it on your own property, put up a Hamas flag, I would say that's a despicable guy and wag my finger, even as I would say he has a right to do it.
would you say it out loud on the sidewalk? Would you stand outside the house and say, "You are a despicable person"?
Yeah, if I wasn't violating the noise nuisance law.
Okay.
To the extent,
Because I
let's have a
probably would.
counter demonstration that doesn't violate anybody's rights, doesn't interfere, block anyone's ingress or egress, and does it legally, and do scream bloody murder about this guy. Do podcasts on it, write articles about it. That's what free speech is about, ladies and gentlemen. It's not about interfering with the rights of other people. Rights are unity, as I say, properly understood. There is no conflict between rights that ever needs a balancing.
Yeah.
This whole
Let
approach that we've been taking on the Supreme Court, in academia, and now in practice in law enforcement is entirely corrupt.
Totally corrupt. I mean, look, if I walked past the house where the guy had a flagpole and a Palestinian flag waving it on his property, I would really have to check in on my principles. Trust me, and that's where principles come in, right? Is especially principles of social ethics. I would have to check in with those because I would want to go up that flagpole and tear that fucker down and burn it right on his front doorstep. But that's not the way we do things here in America. As much as I want to do that, I would have to persuade the person that their perspective is totally psychopathic, and that's what I would endeavor to do. I just want to say, you still can. You just have to pay a fine afterwards. What's that? What was that, Daniel?
Because you
Daniel just
said
said,
you really want to like tear down the flag. I mean, you still can. You'll suffer the consequences of
"Stop
it,
it!
but just
Get thee behind me, Satan."
But like those thugs on the college campuses, if you were to go onto his property and take down some symbol he had put up, you would be violating his rights. Words alone,
Mhm.
even symbolic expression alone, is never a justification for violence.
I
Never,
agree.
ever, ever.
So, look, what we've agreed on here is that the due process is a principle fundamental to Americanism, and that we need to preserve it, even with the most unpopular people. You've more or less shown me that this guy has committed crimes, and for that, I have one thing to say to Mahmoud Khalil. Can I say it? Do you mind if I say it?
Oh, please do.
Have fun in Syria.
Right. Well, there's a question, where do we send him? I understand he's Algerian, but was born in Syria. And so
Yeah.
where do you send him? Well, either one of those, because Syria would be my pick, obviously.
Hey, yeah.
There are bombs dropping from the sky on a regular basis now in
Bring
Syria.
it, baby.
So, yeah, go enjoy Syria.
Yeah, have fun. Have fun with
Yeah,
your new
it's
family in
funny how that
Syria.
makes him a Palestinian. Coming from Syrian and being an Algerian, but in any event, he's a
Yeah,
Palestinian, and
how does that? I don't understand how that calculation works out, because he was born in Syria, he has citizenship in Algeria, but he also spent time in Lebanon, right? He was working for
right,
UNRWA, wasn't he?
right, and that
Yeah,
but he claims Palestinian. Maybe his grandfather
yeah.
was one of these people from the Nakba that they invent
Oh,
from.
that's right. No, there are Palestinian refugees in Syria. That's correct. I forget. They
That's
were
right.
murdered.
So
They were
he
murdered
wants
by
to.
the tens of thousands. They were murdered by the
That's
tens
right.
of thousands, but we didn't hear about that on the
If I
local
were to say
news.
that I have a claim to, my ancestors came from a different place than the country I'm living in. I ought to be able to use my distant ancestors, where they came from, to be able to demand that the governments of England, Ireland, Norway, France take me in and make me a citizen. Well, that is the
They,
same insanity going on with Palestinian refugees, as that they are
oh,
specially defined against any other kind of refugee in this world.
yeah.
No,
Oh,
my ancestors don't give me a right to be anywhere.
that's a whole topic for discussion. The way they have trespassed on the concept of refugee and made the descendants of the actual refugees themselves. I mean,
Right.
that's a moral corruption and a corruption of logic that its intent is to grow the population to such an extent that should they get their right of return, they saturate that area with Palestinians, and it's no longer a
No, the
Jewish
motive is the
state.
destruction of Israel. The
Yes,
motive
clearly.
behind redefining these things always has been the destruction of Israel. That's what's in the back of their head. Yeah.
Oh, well, Frank just gave me an idea. Frank Grail for $2. Thank you so much, Frank, because I didn't think of this. James, what do you think? I could take the Palestinian flag and wipe my butt with it.
Yes, you could. If it
I
was your
could do
flag,
that. No, no, no,
absolutely.
no. But no, but this is the flag. Well, okay. Well, no,
Oh, well, if it's someone else's flag,
yeah, I can't wipe my butt
that's
with it.
theft. That's theft of his flag, isn't it?
Well, I could no, I would have to climb up the flagpole, somehow contort my body in such a fashion that I would be able to.
You're creating an image I can't get out of my
Sorry,
head.
sorry,
Stop,
but I would have to.
stop.
Be, so I wouldn't be stealing the property; it'd still be there. But technically, that's vandalism,
It is.
right?
It would be
I'd
vandalism
be
to
I, deface the
disfigure
property. I think I'm adding something, but wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. This
well,
is a
the
postmodernist
modern
culture.
art might
I'm
agree
not.
you're adding something. I
Yes,
don't
I'm not
know.
defacing it. I'm adding a new color.
Yes, it's political Dadaism.
Thank you very much, Frank. I think you've just given us a suggestion that will enable us to get round the law. I'm just adding a new color. Anyway, James, this has been a real.
This has been real.
Hold on, sorry, I accidentally muted my mic. I don't know how I did that. It's a new mic. But this has been a total pleasure. I haven't seen you in so long, and I feel like we went way over time, just because I was having a ball with you, and I'm hoping you were
Oh,
having a
well
ball with
worth
me.
it, my brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always love doing these things with you. We ought to do more.
I agree with you, and I'm going to try to do these on the weekends from now on because I really miss you guys at the Ayn Rand Center UK. I feel like now that I got my new mic, I feel sort of like I don't know, empowered. It gives me a whole new feeling to be here in this condition. Wait a minute, there was something I had to say. Oh, there's nothing upcoming today, folks. I wanted to make an announcement before we left. But there's a special live session of the reality show on Wednesday on debunking the Nakba. Oh, I can't. I gotta. Oh, I gotta hear that one because uh, the Nakba. It just drives me crazy when I hear that word, the Nakba. Yes, the catastrophe was the Arabs thought they were going to kick the Jews' asses and they lost. And they can't wrap their minds around it to this day.
The best
That
thing that happened in the Middle East over the last 1,000 years is called a Nakba by these people.
Yes,
Think
yes,
about
and
that
worse,
for a
worse.
second.
The combined organized armies of the Arab forces couldn't beat a bunch of militia, a couple of militia groups composed of Jews, and I think that sticks in their cross so much that they just can't take it. So it's a catastrophe for their egos. But you know what? Deflate those egos, pals, because you got your asses whooped, and it's going to happen again unless you give up your psychopathic notion, your fake narrative about territory that you own that you don't. Stop stealing stuff that doesn't belong to you. Get on with state building, man. Get on with peaceful state building. Become the Riviera of the Mediterranean. All right, become the new Riviera. instead of trying to kill Jews. Do something productive, for crying out loud. And I sound like an old dude. I just had my birthday, so I am an old dude.
Happy belated birthday, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you know how old I am?
60.
What? You're going up. You're going up.
60-ish?
You're 60-ish. 60. I just turned 60, but you were going up. 60 something is like does not afford a downward number, my friend.
We grew up in Southern California at about the same time, though, and so maybe that's what explains our, similar energy. I don't know.
Were you in the valley?
I was in La Cañada.
Oh, okay, yeah. I used to teach Taekwondo to the kids out at a school in La Cañada.
Great place to grow up.
Back in my younger days. Yeah, it's a pretty cool place. That school was great. I have great memories of teaching, martial arts back then. Now I just get crushed. Anyway, guys, now we're talking personal stuff, so we should probably release the audience members. It's been great seeing you, James. James, I hope to do it again next weekend.
Let's.
Wait. I see another message here. Sorry. Regina. Thank you, Regina. She just gave us €5. I'm glad to see you here, Regina. Always great to see you. Well, until next time, James, hopefully I'll see you next weekend. We'll keep talking about this stuff. We'll keep hammering you with it until you submit to the truth. And until that time, always remember to check your premises. Peace.
And we have one more super chat from Bull Moose. Thank you so much for 6 shekels, saying, Mark, you look awesome for your age.
Thank you. I appreciate you. See, there's somebody there who appreciates all the hard work I do, James.
Yes, well, I won't inflate your ego any further by letting you know what my wife thinks of how you look. So I'm not going there. I can assure you.
All right, man. Thanks. It's been great seeing you. I hope to see you next weekend.
Be safe.
Peace.